나는 이 저기 제가 들려당하면서 연주기 밀리는 것이 톱 되니게 땡들이야 저기 땡들이야 아니 지게 땡디베 맛에 자침보다 누가 침보 쉬우치레스 제산된다 침보 줍투긴 땡켜바지 톱되어레스 제산 땡들이야 저기 안지 어다 개와치마 하다미고 토비하기 된다리야 아니 지게 Geshe Thubten Dene Tarbata Tamji Kimbo Komo Toyalia, Manzu Kewa Tubchi Nyamne Chewa Kichimores, Denegi, and Denegi Chematuba Ina, and Zuki Chiki Yapo Tobati, Beji Yapotama Tobachi, and the Chiki Pomburo Shiri, on those Chiang to Chishura the Shuke.
Good afternoon. This morning we looked at how this precious life that we have achieved, what a remarkable opportunity it presents us with to accumulate the causes that will lead to further excellent rebirths and causes that can actually lead to liberation and enlightenment itself. But what a great loss it would be if we were not to fully utilize this opportunity.
지게 레로체션 뒤수 트라마다제 델레키주 두고그래 사다 내가 저기 띠엔디에 뒤엔 첨보래 뒤엔 첨보들이야 안지 야고치 냠네 마제버지 뒤수 트라라도네 벨로 팜보래자 냠네 야고시고래 사다 제자는 냠네 제데 기지 제고래라나 남사 다데는 저고 고가 프로틴 제고르마도 뭐 다데가 고가 민데 제마 제고세 되면은 니딩아 줄이야 기티싱해봐요 말해. 제가 디네자 명아저 기회 냠내려고 제바이나 다양한 개와 침을 줘야라. 제리 차상 제자바이나 안되네. 저기 강아요 말해서 자. 제자다 디네게 냠내 제고래서 다 쇼게 가지고 디슬랍제 두스나제 나와래. 제자 델레티나 가지고 두치네. 다게죠 제고야 돼. 개침모임 받지 냠내 제고다 가지고 라렌다야 되디로다.
Moreover, with the recognition that this life we've achieved is precious because of its potential and also how rare and difficult it was to achieve. This allows us to develop the strength of determination not to waste this opportunity. And in order to fulfill this life's potential, we look at where we put our time, put our energy, what we value. And in this way, let go of focusing on what really is not so important. Rather, we should utilize what remains well of this time that we have, because we do not know when death will come. This life can end at any time, and therefore from now we should be preparing for our future lives. So these 4 points that were addressed in the 14th verse, these are the main trainings that establish the foundation upon which all future attainments will come.
Lama nidu yes, Tamza Sabia Kang Rula, Gawar Masim, Lops.
15th verse. If these 4 roots become stable, an abundance of virtuous qualities easily grow. Therefore, like consuming grass next to an old house, joyously, without hesitation, train in the 4 roots.
난 대대르시 대시 자와 땡규나 시데 대대르시 대강을 양한 저기 아니 밀류를 뭐체 녀가와다 아니 된체와 아니 저기 치와 미다바 삼야다 되네 레데 가나 나베레디게 방제 가베레디게 개와디게 사네 냠네 제바디 소라 되네게 냠네 제시 두치네 아니 야고 중바에 나서 대시 자와 땡규나 자와 땡부치 냠네 야고 땡부치 용와이나 세고르다 자와 땡규나.
Therefore, if those 4 roots become stable, so those 4 roots refer to what has been looked at in the 14th verse, recognizing that this precious human rebirth was difficult to obtain, but it has great meaning. And therefore, when we reflect on the brevity of time that remains, we will start to prepare for our imminent future. And by contemplating karma, we will ensure that we abide ethically, not following the afflictions. So these then, in brief, are the 4 roots.
Ande yabu ji nyamne yabu je tembo ro chungwe na dene Geshe Lama de la ni do yes. The Geshe Lama se do nyamlen che Lama de se ora Lama khar yo se na nga ji samde che chi bi ting ye samdang ko mya da ane ji da me ba to be she ra nyamlen che ya ande odo se ne a ju ya an ji ge dene gi da de jianju sem kun ne la kun lo jianju sem ge da dene gi an ji ge jin ba da 随便你们来老说你们来接的是个罗大安这了，当然了，在那个了你们西边的顶部要不全部呢，第一个就给我你们接好嘛，安那听见这公庙的，大面包对比写了老说公庙的这，安这个这种你们的来了我去，安这个要不去给图个来下去，得了你就给下去。
I'll just change the second line a little bit. If those 4 roots become stable, additional virtuous qualities easily grow. So in other words, if one develops that foundation of those trainings well, because the mind becomes more focused, more stable, more focused and more far-sighted, it becomes easy to develop additional virtuous qualities such as bodhicitta, single-pointed concentration, and the wisdom realizing selflessness.
데네게 당하는 저기 당보 냠는디게 대수 냠는디게 야부 템보라 맞은 거지 아니 대수 냠는 맞아봐지 삼대를 야고 미야다 동반이 되베셔라 삼다베네 대수 갈래 레로르지 지갈래 가보라 책으로 그지 두베나 다 윤능부 거야로 책으로 봐 대사 당보 대수 냠는 저도 진다 냠는 마서 림바드 마서나 야고 템보 차도 데네게 오마디 냠는 저 레라다 둠데 용물에 해야지 순거로 봐 디나진 다 문에로 하다가 주게다 롭살 마서로 롭선 당보디게 야고라 차반다 로선 니베디 레드데스 레라고야 다 랍다 부스 다가라와 당보 코로네 안지게 응원도디게 다디 롭선 중화디 말라제 로서 침볼라바나 아니 고야갈래 하고 계시 장외나 균등부 고야 냥 직강 강아쇼자 차고로 강할 시비치고 제가 디나시 저기 당봉원 쪽에 냠는 제도 야고 중국어래 되네 야고 중국에는 딩인지 주변에 내 나와다 되네 딩인지 주변에 다음에 또 배셔라 코미디게 내 나와 용거래 해서 대송거로다.
Yeah, and probably the very first word, if, should be changed to when. When those 4 roots become stable, additional virtuous qualities easily grow. So this is really a key point, that one should not make the mistake of skipping over those foundational qualities that have been looked at explicitly in the 14th verse, because they prepare the mind to make it much easier for additional qualities to grow with ease. And we can understand this from everyday life. If one, when going to school, one doesn't make effort in the lower classes, as one progresses through the years, because that one's foundation is poor, it's difficult to do well in later years if one hasn't got the foundation of the topics or the subjects right. So very much so here too, with our spiritual training. If we don't have the strength of mind and the strength of focus that comes with those foundational trainings, it's very difficult to give rise to additional virtuous qualities. But if that foundation is stable, additional qualities will be achieved, and they will be achieved with ease.
다디네 대시 잠자 세비에 강루라 가월 말씀 자와실로 롭세데 대치를 김전 대치나 다디 잠자 세비 강루세 잠자 세디 뭐니 잠세데 강비기 쇠 강비 망시 자와데 강비 망시 자와 템부 메디겐데 직변에 가와라 소베데 망시 신라서 되네기 강비가 와치 폰디시 여러와 강바제도 지여러 망시서 디 잠세데 강비 drum system drums 망시 되고 고도데 내가 저기 남유지다 drum 세데 먼저 딜을 거에 drum 세다 추인이 drum 세지 drum 세도 거에 여러분 다딜을 drum 잘라도야 추인 지그 추다 되는 게 전에 drum 잠마게 신시자 자르자 세바에서 되네 거에 정서를 받아 이내 다들 거에 또 가르고 그래서 drum 세드면이 강비게 망시 자와 drum 디 템부 매바제 근데 지금 가와로 차교다 때문에 안에 신 가와도 신지게 자와로 체리기나 되네게 세배 강루스의 강바 판도에 메리가 강바 닝바 마리쇼쇼로 강바데 되네게 강바데 있어라 되네 강바데라 안에가 저기 어다디 때 강보다 약보라샤 대 지구도 선배게 다 강바 현다 사바지 제에게 탑람 맞제바제 강바 사야 사바 소야기 안에 라야게 탑람 유다 베네 강바 사바 뇨고나다 강바 사바 자고나다 사베게 규시 사고로와 디데리 맞제바제 강바 닝보데네게 미니 잠차상 루사제 철라도시 강바 철라도게디 아베 약보다 디기도 삼되바이나 안디 강보데 게디 리소는 냐바요 말바 철라도 지산 데니게 철라도 데려야 아니 지게 아디디구도 빼야 버려 디디구 선배 로디에지 돼요 말레스 비로시 디로다데 데지 로디에요 말레스 지산 강보 사바 디 게디 딥 냐바요 말 지산 데니에서 소소 강보게 되사기 사바 네 죄기 규지나다 강보 사바 라야기 녀야기 나 변조 가르고나 디데디를 제고를 마도 디데디 맞아봐자 강보 닝베데네게 망시 템보메데 리쇼죠 예간 강보 철라도게들이야 배다 디샤선 별로 되오시 되어요 말해야지 비로직 다 뉴디리도함.
The third line, and here I need to change it quite a lot. So the third line, therefore, like a stable foundation of an old house. So that's a little different. So therefore, like a stable foundation of an old house. Now the example makes some sense. So if one is wanting to build a new home, and there is an old dilapidated wreck, but the foundation is stable, then one can knock down the walls and so forth and build again, with confidence that the new house will be stable. So similarly, so this is then building on what we've been looking at here, that if one's foundation that has been established is not stable, what the walls one tries to build, even if one puts a lot of effort into trying to build walls, but the foundation is not stable, those walls are going to sway. They're not going to be safe and secure. And if there is perhaps up in the mountains, there are earth tremors, those walls are going to fall down. So therefore, we should, to read the 3 lines, when these 4 roots become stable, additional virtuous qualities easily grow. Therefore, like stable foundations of an old house, and the 4th line will come.
잠자 세바서 강비게 잠게 자와디게 바 세제 근데 지게 닝바로 차되네 다 강바디 마 철라전의 루 강룰바스의 강룰스가 리쇼셔다 바 철라도게 시그로와 데디 비로 치체 델야 가와체 되바네 델야 바다 지구도 섬 로데 되바네 아니 제말 경치무라 냐가 요르스그로와 다디 디나시 당아 주게 다데 잠자 세베 강바 견쇼와디나 가르베셔셔스나 아주다 체델이야 소수기 되야야 안지 지게 소수기 되는 차바게다 지가서 체디게다 롱주섬 주비에기 당한 저기 체디섬기 디기 주비야다 롱주 주비야량 레가레 저러와 내가 니장장 레제는 안에 지게 제와 치마 사람 미고바 토야다 탈바 탐지 김고바 토비기 귤이야 마장바체 Lobsang 가서 곰년을 맞아봐제 때 디점기 디기 잠랑 줍제 디점기 디기 루에 된다라 아는 안쪽에 내가 제바데 제바이나 안데 디점이 딩 말해서 다 잠자시비에 강로시도 디점기 안쪽에 디기 다 디점이야 안지 차신께네 내가 자와들이야 디 강반하시레스 그다 강바 자와 dimme바데 안데 지게 딘하시레스 제가 다 내가 브링리아 안세딜리아 되네게 되었을 때 용거세 템부스카야 말아디 아니 디 메와 차선은 언제 개와 치마디 유튜브에 규사야 말에 안을 타바 탐지 김고 먼저 규사요 말 제자디 용야 용거 말 제자디 잠기 초도 삼바 당아디 나기오도 나 직도로 야고 고야도 나 사야도 야고도 아는 알아 내 파서 캠이야도 강한 민도 삼 디잠기도 진 지구도 삼 되바이나 다데 내가 그런데 지고르데 마원바나 아니 야고야 규사면에 야고용 말와서 그래 제사디 되네게 삼다제 디 디도 삼바제 가와 마제서 디 디도 삼비게 가와 마제 바제 아니 말씀 자와시로 롭스데 디지 자와시 제가 대시 대마산바제 대시 틱도 마산바제 몽바나 야고양야 된다라 아니 다시니가 와도 된체와다 아니 가소래 아니 제 치망아 상기 그래서 우리 제가 치마 되는 거 줘야게 된다로 주 아니 개벨에 되겠어 아니 지금 미개벨에 방책게 디봉게도 제거래서 자와실로 롭세 되지 강시들 어디 장도 제거 냠는 제거 디제바이나 아니 제들이다 제와치마에 디기도 투그래야지.
So recognizing then that those four roots, if one has cultivated them in a way that's stable, then all other qualities, additional qualities, will easily grow. And then the verse continues, therefore, like a stable foundation of an old house, joyously, without hesitation, train in those four roots. So here, joyously, we should understand as have a training with confidence that in those four roots, reflecting on the precious human rebirth we've attained, it's the rarity of it, but its great meaning. Nevertheless, it's impermanent, and training in cause and effect. So training with that as one's foundation, putting effort into that, with confidence that this is the foundation upon which all later attainments will be achieved easily. This is important to understand for a couple of reasons. One being, it's all too easy to be drawn because of one's imprints to want to start out training for engaging in the higher trainings without having built a foundation. So following one's imprints, training in perhaps wisdom or in concentration, whereas one has not yet established that foundation. Rather, from this presentation, generates conviction that get the foundations right, then those other goals that you yearn for, they will come about with ease. So that's one key benefit of reflecting on what's being presented here. The second is that what has consumed our life are these various mundane pleasures where we sit with a relaxed mind, enjoying all that we've worked for, having a nice time, enjoying delicious food, company with friends, maybe a nice holiday, and thinking this is as good as it gets, without having much focus on the lives yet to come, without any thought of liberation and enlightenment. This is a grave error. Just consuming the results of karma created in the past without putting effort into creating causes for the future. This is a mistake, because again, one is not creating this foundation, one is not training well in those four roots. So this is the second way that one can waste this opportunity, either, as mentioned now, by being lost in worldly affairs, striving for things that we do tend to put our energy into, that really have no lasting value, or trying to accomplish Dharma goals that are too lofty for where we are now because we haven't developed the right foundation. Don't make either of those errors. Reflect on the way that's presented here, and then joyously or with confidence, train without hesitation in the four roots.
타만이들 삼다변의 배로 좀 나지는 사실에 아저 강비게 참 어느 맞아 마 자와 띵띵 자와디 안에 자와 띵부 망시 자와스는 망시디 띵부 매디게 안에 강바 안에 리셔쇼 철라도 쇼쇼 강바디 지 여바이나 아주 디나를 되어바이나 다디 되게 미디 이게 가래 아주 원이 신다 하고는 디소 오다 강바디 자와 띵부요마 리쇼쇼레 게디 철라도 하고요 말씀베게 삼단다 강바 사바제다 안에 사바녀야기 디 귀긴디 탑라 탑시기로 하다 오네 탑시에는 디 마안 제게 가서 사바라야기 탑시기로 와 제가 되네게 탑시 지고로 와서 되네 탑시 제마신 반다 디기도 강바 빼하고래 삼제 될야 지금 자신께지 디기 게 안에 현다 탑시 맞제 반나 제만이야 디 강바데 게디리야 마리스나 네 경치모라리 제사다 디리소네 데네 사바녀 응외리메 데네 규규제메 지네 강바 마라지 강바 메바디야 료가 차가 강아데네 체고로 와스 비디나시 당아 저기 체디잠기 안에 자와다 레갈야 데니기 데기 차진 도시네 안지 고거제 개와치마 타르 사다미 고마 토야다 타르바다 탐제kim이 고마 토야래 베제 마제바 디즈미 오다 디링 아기부도 레레도 선배 데니게 디간 삼다제 도시되베나 아네 저게 내가 브링리아 제 강부 교분나를 되네 내가 브링 판도지어로 와다 내가 브링 리마로 봐도 판 베저로 안디 나시 나도 마시 봐도 체디 내가 쏘다 디기를 돼 연구를 돼 근데 치마 망오바나 디기 유마사바인자 안에 강아치 뭐 차기를 디엔사다 데니기 체디 디zam게 자와로 고화치 마차바제 안에야 개와 치마 야보야 된다래야 내 자와실을 납고그레스 자와시 곰고그레스지 두순고로 니바니디 지사다 니바니 송베 제리야 다 디간선 디가마니 삼던 지사 자와시 디를 야고 납체 냠는체 템부심 템부로체 야고 차송나 데니 디 제마 안 삼데나 셔라 냠는체 알이야 냠는체 야들이야 벨레라 우용고레스 델라도 델라 게셜 하마디게 안 델라니도 게세 레라 우지 냠는체 델라 우용고레스지
Looking again at this illustration, this analogy, if we think, let's say you've got your heart set on building a home somewhere beautiful, but you know that area is prone to earthquakes. Knowing that and having intelligence, good education, the home that you build there, you'll ensure it has a stable foundation. Then when the expected earthquakes come, your home will be fine. Your beautiful home in a beautiful environment will stand up with ease to earthquakes. If, on the other hand, one is overly confident, perhaps a little bit arrogant, and just builds in this earthquake-prone place in the normal way, just a small tremor will lead to disaster. So taking that then as inspiration, then turn away with confidence from what isn't important. Recognize that these various things that fill up our mind, the comings and going in the world, in society, in our families and so forth, that these are very temporary, they have no real value. They do not need the amount of mental effort we usually put into them. Rather, take care of what needs to be taken care of, but have your focus on what is truly important. Build the foundation. Build the foundation of these 4 trainings, and do so with the confidence that when that foundation is stably built, then the additional virtuous qualities, concentration, wisdom, bodhicitta, these will be achieved with ease. So reflecting well like this, it becomes easier to turn away from what isn't important, and with joy and with delight engage in what has real meaning.
Adine za da han juge sangye jomnin degi nga de degi juya da dunga segi tablab nela jesa garsun gorasene sangye gi nga ju deba tsam mayin ba je gyapsu chesebe deba tsam gi ane juge 개와치 말하다 미고와 토야다 탈바다 탐지기 미고와 토투고 말해스 제자디 말소서기 냠는 제고레스 마제바에 있는 대바점기 대바 제바점기 아니 소수기 디 냠는 토투고 말해 이제 상기기야 아니 소수기 냠는 제모와제 상기기 안지야 고여신 디일이야 고야세가 용투 말와스 이내서 소소랑 제고레스 송고로다.
So Buddha Shakyamuni presented that the method to achieve happiness and to overcome suffering starts with turning away from this life's mere pleasures, this life's mere problems, and to see them in a truer perspective, and not allow ourselves to be dominated by them, but rather to lift our mind beyond this mere life.
Dine zanda gane chegore susu chegore nyamne gane chegore sen di ma labken di da sanje ge lamden chegore wa da sanje ge ma solia ane dosu chigno mo ba yaya de ge dine yongore pangda de ge dine ba di nyembo dine sten gom gore samlo dine tang gore dine tang ba na nya zo kya wa sa gore samlo dusle ne dunga yong gore cheza gyu 디버사 제전 디버사 유 삼로 땅교 말이 디 도죠 개위 삼로 되게 야내야도 땅제 디양 nipa chertang kore saji de sungorwa dene sungbanza dene nyamlen jebaina dela dene nga de denjen jawa jowa se jiza dela dene nyamlen jeba dela dene debu ane digi yada tar dengi dewa toya andunga nyomo batu ba jungore saji.
Moreover, the Buddha taught that whilst we need to strive for good future rebirths, that should not be our sole goal. We need to gain freedom from liberation in its entirety so that we no longer are faced with the possibility of falling into the lower realms nor suffering in the higher realms. And to do that, we need to accumulate extensive virtue and abandon the afflictions. And train in this method that he taught repeatedly over a sustained period. So the accumulation of virtue means strengthening our virtuous or wholesome ways of thinking, and abandoning our afflictions means abandoning the unwholesome or the non-virtuous ways of thinking. This is what we need to train in. So in dependence on cultivating wholesome ways of thinking, we abandon the afflictions, the unwholesome ways of thinking. So here, one hears the need to incorporate the presentation on dependence arising. And in this way, one progresses towards the attainment of lasting happiness.
dunga yukunyu pongores jezada dines ganis pongores akasore lamgom gore lamgom bachas ane dine ane goba de toba jebure saji goba onde jebure saji de sonro jeza da dambo dunga de ha gores dunga de ha gone dunga de ganle jun yu de ha go jen yu de pango gores yu de pambaina dine gorde saji togores yu de paya tablam gare pansa lamgom ne pango gores jeza di san yegida 냠랭이 림바 시디 되죠. 대디 시디 안쪽에 낭베기다 냠랭제기 다 쪼로 시디다 고 쪼로 마서네. 나중에 내가 저기다 저기 나저 발리 추기나데 안에 산스크리트 추기나 추기 차상기 다 냠랭조 쪼디르 다가 냠랭제기.
In Buddha Shakyamuni's very first teaching in Varanasi, he taught that suffering needs to be known and its origin needs to be abandoned. The path is what one needs to train in, the path in order to abandon the cause of suffering, and that cessation of suffering is what we need to attain. And this very first set of teachings was recorded in both the Pali and Sanskrit canons.
지사 당한주기 동아 셰바샤세 동아다 하고 그랬을 나랑주기 동아데 야고자 하고 두고 말해. 동아들은 동아 유에 동아 차와두지 동아 숨묘래. 제가 나랑주기 동아다 하고 그러마다 아니 유에 동아다 차와두지 동아서 인가서 하고 두고 말해. 제가 디 하고 마도 완전 디유 군중세대 방주기 숙심부터 방두고 말해. 제가 당아서 유에 동아라나 나아줄야 까지 수보라 나자다야다 되게 토네지 동아 초와 동아 녀아디 동아에 딩아도 차상기다 동아이 뭐 하고 이제 디메바서야 탑람딩 아주 면제제야다 차상디 지거로 받아 어디 디 지거로 마도 유에 동아다 차바두지 동아 세딩 안쪽에 하고 두고 말 제가 되네 마도 반자다 동아하고 지그래서 조어다 유에 차바두지 동아디게 동아이 바데 파 삼다 김센 삼다 제바제자 디 하고 지고래서 뭐다.
So of these four, that the suffering that is to be known, the cause which is to be abandoned, the path which is to be trained, and cessation which is to be attained. The very first one is suffering that needs to be known. So this is the first point the Buddha taught. And for us still, suffering is largely unknown. We don't easily recognize suffering. The causes level of suffering, the suffering of physical and mental pain, this is quite easy to recognize. This we know about, and in society there are many methods and techniques to overcome physical suffering, mental suffering, and so forth. But the two subtler levels, the suffering of transient happiness and all-pervasive suffering of conditioning, these two are largely unknown, unrecognized. And without knowing suffering, knowing all three levels of suffering well, one is not going to have the strength of mind, the determination and the focus to be able to engage in abandoning the causes of suffering. So therefore, one needs to start training at the very beginning here to recognize what is suffering, or the pervasiveness of suffering.
And Kunju said, Dunga Yudil, Dunga Yu, Benanzo, this kissing Shevanachi, to her shall control Naya, Yomo, but you Kunju Sheva, which is the Dunga Yudes, the Papango said. That one to do in a Jebachi Dugabla, that one to control said, the Shah control said, Ganski Gores, that there, the Shah control at Dunga Yungo was, that Dunga Yudi to a Shah control than Yomo Batikiri. That this one Ganski Gores Pachi, Conju Gudi, that Tenjin, Jawa and the Gud and Kinchilla, then the Gigor, this one, you got a little in the Gigor, King got a little in the Gigor yesterday. That is you saw the answer game. Denzin Maribam doesn't Marikpa said, Ma said, Sosorang, Rang Jeba Zimbi, Jizin Maripa, Denzin Maripa, Dilit in the Kigo Regire.
When one has a good understanding of suffering, in particular the subtler levels, then one has the determination to seek out what is the source of our suffering or the cause of our suffering. And this, as was mentioned briefly in a previous talk, these are our afflictions such as attachment and anger. So our afflictions, they are the source of our suffering or the cause of our suffering. So this is another illustration of dependence arising. Independence on our afflictions follows suffering. But then how do our afflictions arise? What is their cause? And all our afflictions have as their root one particular cause, ignorance. In particular, the ignorance can be called two things. It can be called the ignorance of self-grasping or the ignorance of true grasping. This is the root cause from which our other afflictions arise and all our suffering follows.
Gareshi corner Sagido sitting out Sosorangi do Chimju Chevena, the Michi, the Matumba Changans, Michi, corner Savena. That corner Sada, the Canes says on the course Canes Sagido some Tavena. Sosogi, Deva did that Matumba Pacho di Jena, some corner Lada. Sosogi, Deva did that Mutumba 60 Labna, Soso corner La Chili Yorova. So that Deva the Tumbe, Soso Deva Tumbe. Peggy Chevene did go with Chagro. Just on corner, so good to about them. Ah, say, nay, shed in Imidus, said Cornell. Nalia knew said, just on Dampo, say, some legislation. Nala knew do. Nay, Shevat in the Tumidu, Nay, Shevat in Jimidus and Cornell. Just on corner, say, Nadin de Lele. Just adding on to do Simji Chevena, Cornell, didn't ligate, to a shot yet digligate, didn't she to Jalad? Oh. Nala Gugus, Nasa Damboje, and Jeladi Nala Gugu said. In Denige, our Dushan legal, just that you shut down Conroda, Nayadi, Chasas, Nayadi, and Nasa, Nasa Damboje, and Hadi, you did the Carol and Achewa, and Ayagi, sometimes Chesa, Mazunayaki, and Dusha, Conrogan, Dabu Nasa, some of the courage, dilit in the game. Chesan Nasa, Mazindi, Narashin Juba, Temple Juba, in Dilit, and Yungo edge.
So if we take an affliction that's quite easy to recognize, that of anger, and remembering this term anger refers to the entire class, from frustration and annoyance right up to rage and hatred. So why does anger arise? Well, it arises in dependence on causes. So there can be many different causes, but let's just take, we think of someone we dislike. We don't need to meet them, we don't need to hear their voice, just really calling them to mind disturbs our mind. So why is it then that we dislike them? This disliking of them came about in dependence on something. There's a reason why we dislike someone. And that is, most probably, they said or did something against our wishes. That's all. they said was something against my wishes. If they had acted in accordance with my wishes, different story. I wouldn't be angry with them. I wouldn't dislike them. I would consider them a friend. But the fact that they have done something that is against my wishes, this is why I dislike them. This is why I'm angry at them or resentful towards them. So what we see here is that the very heart of this process is I. What was said to me, what was done to me, what I think about that. So from this root cause of how we think of the I, from this I arises the other afflictions such as pride, attachment, anger, resentment, and so forth.
Dine du sheneng arze samda de kongra de side nga sebe samdo de legyo ba du shago ra. Da nga se samdo ge nga se samdo de nga se de samdo de nga zule lo lia nga se de gane se lo lia chargo ra se ne. Nga se de nga zugi phungbo da chashi nga la ya ma de ba korong we ne ye de ba ji nga zulo lia de chargo ra. Charba na shin dinji yore sambi ge jinggo da di nga ra shin ju ba nga demba ju ba zu bi tin sen se ya di nga zule lo lia nga se de nga za cha du nga se de nga zu phungbo de le lo so chi ga ya me phungbo de la ma den ba korong nga ji ye ba chi cha di ye ba da ga ra yore sambi jinggo re di jingba de le den jin se or da da sen marik pasna den jin marik pasda di re che sa de nyomo ge yu cha san de le de yong go re je di re sta za wa di re 제산 디방송 배는 요모께요 말이죠. 제산 요모께 보면은 디고사요 말이 디고 마서 놓고 나선을 깨요 말이니 대와 탈바세 두고 그러지. 잘 조금 맞춰나 주세. 네, 먹어는 하게谢谢谢这个난 잘 주는 거 잡들이나 지시가 오랜만.
So I'm sorry, I don't know a good solution to help you at the back here, anything I'm saying, but anyway, I'll just talk, and sorry if you can't hear me. So Geshe here is presenting the sequence by which we come to suffer. It starts with how we relate to our I or ourself. So these words are interchangeable, I or self. So when we investigate how the I appears to us, or our sense of self appears to us, it appears as if it is non-dependent. It appears as if it is not dependent on our body and mind, like our self or our I is independent or not dependent on our body and mind. And then we grasp at the self as existing in this way. We believe that it exists in the way that it appears. That no matter what our body and mind is doing, no matter how much it changes, we still have this independent, unchanging self. So we then grasp at the self as existing in this way. And this is self-grasping, or it can be called true grasping. From this self-grasping follows all our afflictions. From this misapprehension of the self, being a misapprehension, it's an ignorance. And from this ignorance then of self-grasping follow all our other afflictions, such as pride, anger, attachment, jealousy, and so forth. And from these afflictions, we accumulate non-virtuous karma, and when non-virtuous karma ripens, it ripens in suffering. So this is the sequence by which we come to suffer. And to then present it in the reverse order, suffering comes from the ripening of non-virtuous karma. Non-virtuous karma is accumulated by our afflictions, and our afflictions have at their root the ignorance of self-grasping. And the ignorance of self-grasping is believing that the self exists in a way that is not dependent or independent of the body and mind.
Yeah. Yeah, that. Oh, do she know some? Just当然是都是的，说说人啊，是只有罗的。当然都什么的，啊是的，啊就是肯定是都写吧写吧，那什么大边的，哦，啊是苏的，老巴的呢，俺的来嘛，你老巴的嘛都俺马的来个是吧？现在刚巴的呢，你老巴的嘛都刚巴的嘛都俺马的是，过的啊俺马的，现在苏不拿了去。那下单、包包的、入货单、茶单、车上这边，这是俺买的，把一万七十了的。但俺买的话，这个苏贵的车些那呢，俺晒的买的是。但那能三六的，你眼三六的嘛，都俺买的那个话，三六的俺买的是。那都现在的俺的搞都是呢，碰波的、碰波的苏贵的车些，俺也俺的没得，那三六的俺没得。今天地来老说俺就搞有的是呢，那是也有嘛吧？就说。都是什么大呗呢？这个点让就碰波当切些点出来点的，马对吧？下的为你主推进来的没问题的。
When we investigate, when we search for the self to see whether the self does exist in the way that it appears, we first need to get a good feeling, a good understanding of our self appearing to the mind. And then we look for the sense of self. And we look in two places, in two general places. The first is our body. And so mentally we divide our body into varying components. And we think, am I my arm? Am I my legs? Am I my head? And of course we can't find ourselves in any single body part. Nor if we go into the body parts hidden beneath the skin. We may identify as these, we may identify as our fat, but we can't find ourselves as being that. So we don't find ourselves in our body at all. So we then search in the second place. What about our mind? So if we then divide our mind into varying different minds, we cannot find our sense of self within any one mind either. So we end up searching for ourself, but not being able to find it at all.
我今天都现在俺最多三单，当然说说三单的是说说俺写的，我等于老板的俺马路话是俺老板的写的，都现在俺苏布的车上的，的那个这边的俺马路话是什么呢？但俺的考话都是考上俺考话都是呢，的呢。地雷生对俺见面了吧？地雷先生来，我等个地雷生做事改没多的，其实俺地雷生对俺改了没多，都是呢兴趣去呢，都学会了。俺地雷生有呢年没就说，但地雷生年那地雷先生对俺错了，就没了的。
So we search again and again in our varying body parts, in our varying different consciousnesses, trying to find ourself, and everywhere we look. We keep coming to the same conclusion. This is not the I, this is not my sense of self-identity. And we cannot find ourselves at all.
你那在咱你俺的年面呢，介绍都是呢兴趣切切，俺写的刚来马对吧？让我们主播的这呢年面吧，这但你那这呢马东一个东北恰要就是说，你那个东上的了呀。东北人修了，东北人修了，其实这些刚来嘛，就让我们主播金巴的来点进马路，你们也吃上七切。
just about how Geshe was describing how this good rebirth that we've got, is very rare. But it seems like there was a question about it's so hard from the animal realms or the insect realm to actually get out of there. How is it that we even have this one good rebirth?
Yama Diwane, Mileki, or Haleki, or Dundureki, that Dimaki say, I have that. Then I asked Yama Diwan, Miliki, Haleki, or Law on Rush Nelia, Miliki, Haleki, the nigger Sunam Sasha, Sunam, Sunam Sasha. And he, Parade, I am Dundureki, to do a cake, you move to do a jacket, yes, sure. Yene Uchi, Anzan Yama Shalom Sashi, which you would change it, he to be not really now the Yama Halake or the military, Dima said that in answer come home, so Sumela Sasanki, that he might have said higher answer. Then he got a kid, the Yama to me, Shalom, was sorry, back up to you to do Lama with it. Then Yama Shalom Sashi, the change.
So, my voice doesn't travel far. Apologies at the back, but I'll try. So, you can hear? Oh, fantastic. So, in this life, we are, of course, human beings. But in lives previous to this, we have lived across the varying realms. We have been gods, we have been animals, we've been other unseen beings, spirits in hell, and so forth. So, in lives previous to being in the lower realms, we would have been human beings. And in that previous life as a human being, we accumulated virtue. But when death came, we fell to the lower realms. But that virtue that was created, whilst it wasn't sufficient to lead to a further human rebirth in the very next life, it did lead nevertheless. It did nevertheless remain on our continuum. So whilst we were then in the lower realms, eventually the karma to remain in the lower realms got exhausted. And this could take absolute eons. But eventually it got exhausted. And then our virtue that had been accumulated in lives previous to that eventually could ripen and lead to a rebirth again as a human being. So this is the process by which one manages to get born out of the lower realms, but one does remain stuck there lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. when comparing the situation for humans and animals to accumulate merit, it is incredibly different or vastly different. For humans, it is so easy to accumulate merit because of our incredible intelligence. And people do accumulate merit regularly and with ease. It may not be particularly strong, but they do so. Compared to animals, compared to beings in the lower realms, it can be said that it is not possible for them to accumulate merit because it's so much, but what this means is it's so much more difficult for beings in the lower realms to accumulate merit that when compared to humans, it's as if it were impossible. It doesn't mean, though, that it is completely impossible for beings in the lower realms to accumulate merit. So, for example, the Buddhas can manifest as animals or as spirits, and then perhaps as a parent or in the languages that these beings speak or the ways that they communicate, can guide them to accumulate some form of merit or some weak form of merit, but at least it's something. And one story we know from the Buddha was where he recounted that a person in a very distant previous life had accumulated merit when they were an insect floating on a piece of dung around a stupa. So in that manner, as an insect, this being created some merit. So similarly then, we know from Lama Zopa's example, how he would take a dog around a stupa or blow mantra onto animals and so forth, in order to enable them to gain some kind of imprint. So it is possible for beings in lower realms to accumulate virtue. When compared to humans, though, we can say it's not possible because the capacity is so vastly different. For humans, it's easy to accumulate merit, whereas for beings in the lower realms, it's possible, but so much more difficult. And this understanding, then, we apply to make the most of our life now, so that we do not fall into the lower realms. So whilst the animals really can't do much, we can do a little to help them. Especially if you have a pet at home, you can bring them around the stupa. You can recite mantra when there are beings around you, so that at least get an imprint of hearing a sound of the mantra and so forth. So this isn't much, but it is about the best that can be done. And Pamela, I think you had a question? Did you have a question? Yeah? Oh, okay. I thought I saw you lift your hand. Okay. Several?
Can I just ask a follow-on question? Just would it require an animal when they're dying to also just have a condition for the positive karma to ripen? Like, could an animal have like a neutral positive mind that would condition a karma to ripen at the time of death?
Dene dungdu, dene konsukula gewa sapun yode. Dene gewa sapun de mini kichedu kin chikoki debe.
시료 제주 갑라 안에 나머지게 되게 게 가서 시료 제주 갑라 파내게 시나 소고가 지 통송나 니 이견전에 안에 지 시나 자로 통로라야서 이 기회에서 뭐 게 과체미야 미기회 과체미야겠냐 하는데 엔디메 내가 아직 차고의 차고의 위에 그 시료 제주 차고의 위에서나 통소가 제일 차고께서나 이래야 미기로 이제 먼저 교회냐. 이 매배에 아직 기회 선물로 다 되게 기회로 최소한은 아니 지 기회 받으면 되고
민낭신 양승 배배.
미미를 여가데 심제에 따라와 신학계다 차와계다 이거
The situation for animals is, in this regard, at the time of death, is the same for humans. That at the time of death, it's important to die with a mind that, preferably that is not afflicted, but rather a mind that is virtuous. So if the human or the animal is dying with, especially a strong affliction such as fear, this does not help. Or if they're dying with attachment. Because these are more, if dying with afflictions manifest, mean it's more probable that a non-virtuous imprint will ripen. But if they can die without afflictions manifest, then there's a better chance of a virtuous imprint ripening.
개발을 공처여나 개비 받쳐는 이게 디비가 공처인데 디비 받쳐는 이 거라서 마시에 가르도 공처에다 디비에서 내니기 개발 순고래.
And for again humans or animals, when death comes, if the mind is in a more in an unafflicted state, a more neutral state, the imprint that will ripen is what one is most habituated to, whether virtuous or non-virtuous. So if the mind has been trained well and habituated to virtue, then that is what will ripen at the time of death. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Reading the 16th verse. Having depended at the, and if at the back, if people can wave if I get too quiet, okay? Okay, thank you. Having depended at the beginning on the power of the fields, a deep strength of mind will grow. Revere the spiritual teacher and three jewels through engaging in the foundation, which is continuous practice.
난기 산비에 뜻이 기주가 대단하죠. 내 담보 어디야 토마 담보 신기 투는 땡고에 신세에 대한 개와사 유 자꾸소 투다 아니 지가 라마타 되게 얘라 땡제 아주 스케줄 주고 그래서 제가 내가 뒤로 다가서 소수비 뒤에야 아니 부르샤 근데 지게 얘네 땡시하면 얘네 초크야다 아니 지게 아주 두시네 고하비가 근데 랑게 라마다 되네 유면 라마 제레 되네 최에 라마 제레 되네 초크야다 되네 고하 그래서 제가 통말 담보 신기 투라 되네 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 땡시 아니 나지 개와사고 해서 난게 산이 때 기주가 나게 개위 상도 주신 야게다 그래서 있습니다. 통말서 담보가 신기 투라 되네 아주 최 개와사의 신기 투 신 아니 유 아니 자유 아니 상계다 자유 생발서 꾸꾸된다 아니 지금 남아서가 두세 개를 때한 개를 때는 아주 개회 자와 상도지 야게다 그래서
Just going to change the first two words very slightly of the first two lines. Depending at the beginning on the field, depending at the beginning on the power of the field, the deep strength of mind will grow. So the power of the field then refers to either of the three jewels or one spiritual teacher. So depending on them at the beginning, so perhaps on one shrine, one has images of the three jewels or calls one spiritual teacher to mind. So at the start of a session, this is the field that one relies on, and it gives one a strength of mind, a confidence.
所以给我都给我的这个托马斯，真在刚才就说这个今天那么只能学蒙古语，那说这个短的蒙古上大菜完了，那说了没来说是结果参加的这些呢，你说是给我3年的接触了新的话，就是今天也这样，当我们这个那个国里啊，去过店里啊，那么古典送店的啊，去过会啊，恰菜哇，没到过了，都现3年你给我啥的，都啥不开始，就是那个。这个咱们就是那么去蒙古的些说出来，到了咱们新闻了，那么没呢，他们说是参加的，就说是个几乎咱们去辛苦去用过了，就是托马斯当官的，来当官的了，那个电官的心里头的电把的几千块钱。
Moreover, at the beginning of our training, then it's imperative to rely on our spiritual teacher for guidance and for inspiration. Receiving teachings, learning those teachings, reflecting on those teachings. And whilst doing so, we take inspiration from our teacher. We have our images on our shrine to whom we make offerings and accumulate virtue and so forth. And then by training in this way for an extensive period, we will then slowly, for shorter periods and then longer periods, be able to go somewhere more isolated, having now received not just a good education in terms of having heard many things, but having gained a lot of experience of meditating in a group with our teacher and so forth. Then we'll be ready to go away somewhere isolated alone and then apply those teachings on our own. So as beginners, one is encouraged not only to rely on a teacher, but to have one's statues and so forth in one's place of practice. And because it makes it so much easier to accumulate merit in relation to having an established shrine. And also merely by seeing the images, as beginners, it turns our mind immediately back to the Dharma, away from all our distractions, rather to what we should be focusing our mind on. And as beginners, we should engage in these straightforward, simple ways to accumulate merit so that other practices can later come about more easily, doing circumambulation, making offerings, and so forth. And when one does so, to the best extent one can, one develops a faith, particular faith that comes from hearing teachings, reflecting on their validity, and cultivating them within. This leads to the cultivation or the generation of genuine faith. And when you take the story that we heard before of an insect floating around a stupa and yet creating some form of merit, from this then we can understand that when we do circumambulation with whatever level of faith or trust in the three jewels, how much merit we will be accumulating. So therefore, from that take some confidence to engage in these more straightforward acts of practice.
this and teacher of Kuya, the control of Chokuya, Ducine, Jindu, Sitine, Dumas, or Moody, Jeju Joy, Jehu, Gunche never Joa, Dim Salos, Jehu is as you want, Java Chepaso, the Nigga, Gun Micheva Janet, Joa, Jehu is, the Nigina, Geshe Thubten.
And the last two lines in the 16th verse. Revere the spiritual teacher and three jewels through engaging in the foundation, which is continuous practice. So when you think of making offerings to the teacher and the three jewels, then one does so with water bowls, making light offerings, flowers, and so forth. And this is good to do. But the very best offering is to listen to teachings with sincerity, to cultivate them by thinking about them again and again. And as mentioned earlier by Lama Tsongkhapa, listening to teachings on the same topics, reflecting on those same topics again and again, not allowing the mind to tire of hearing the same topic presented yet again, but recognize that each and every time we hear the same teaching, we are thinking about the same teaching. And by doing so, we are engaging in, as it says in the fourth line, in continuous practice, continuously hearing the same things, reflecting on the same things. This is how we develop habituation and develop the Dharma within.
The negative is also somebody, the somebody, one important dot, send a dot, you was it, send a dot, Mugina, Getting Yaman, give somebody should share, and then should share, yes, the day I should share the divisions and the other church in do, and the then you don't show up, then you talk out that, don't show up. And she was some time, and it can I get Yamaji and then dance and material edition. The nation is also
The meaning of this verse then is that as beginners, we need to apply ourselves repeatedly over a sustained period, primarily in hearing teachings and reflecting on them again and again and again, not being distracted by the desire for something new, but striving to cultivate the foundations, those roots that we looked at earlier. And this is the primary offering to make, that of hearing and reflecting. But in addition, for variety, one can engage in the physical activities as well of making offerings, prostration, circumambulation. But whilst doing so, taking care of our mind so that we are not just engaging in physical activity, but whilst doing so, we are mentally aware as well. So through this process, we strengthen our virtuous minds. This process, again, of primarily hearing teachings and reflecting on them, supported by other activities. And by doing so, then those four roots, we start to become more habituated to them. We start to truly recognize the preciousness of this life and its great potential, but its impermanence. And therefore, our mind becomes ever more focused, ever more powerful and stable. And in this way, we experience growing virtue because of the strengthening virtuous minds within us. This is how we transform how we live our life.
탈과다 탐지킨도 위에 위딘지 만족이 미유도 야가요. 제가 두개 미바 티셔츠 같은 거 야가 선거 제가 느껴야겠어. 그러나 저기 미 유딘들의 양면 제가는 세대야 세다가 나라 탈도 타바 토투고 있어. 안디 말이 상계고 레이 때들이 안지 개와서 봐 타르바 토마토 이거를 산지고 와서 뒤에 이거 이거 말해서 미팅이 전에 이게 돼야 돼. 제가 내가 이게 산지고 봐 줘야 이지미다 하디게 개와치 이게 야매지 하디 개와치 미비를 개와셔서 뭐는 개고 레제데 제가 이제 미비를 때 마세기다 미디어에 하는 게 미다 배신 나눠서 되는 토야에 봐도 미디어에 제 장단이냐 미 샤르 미바와서 미 만화도 있다 만화도 미디어 전부를 비시고 어디 그 바라지 비시 어디 여기 다네 만화도 그 전부를 있다 만화도 유디디 약속해서 와다미 가서 야매지 아니야 타바 탐지기로 고바 유디 약속을 이해해서
그렇지 라히나 콘수 타르파 톱토기레 상게 말에 타르파 톱토기레 타르파 톱
타르파 톱토기레 제대로서 왔다 체지 가서 제대라
거선
체지를 거라 상게 고바 톱토기레 되니기로 해서
A further point to make to recognize how fortunate we actually are is that when generally if people were to say who has the greatest fortune in life, we'd look to those with the greatest pleasure, health and happiness. And whilst we can't perceive them, the beings with the greatest pleasure and happiness and freed from illness and having long lives are gods in the form and formless realm. So they can be, from a mundane point of view, considered the most fortunate beings, but they are still bound within samsara. And though amongst those beings, there are some that have an interest in the Dharma, but they recognize their limitation that they have. Whilst their lives are so much longer than ours, their lives are not punctuated by cause illness and by cause suffering and illness and so forth, but have so much happiness, they recognize that they are limited in terms of their spiritual development. They cannot attain Buddhahood in that life. Whereas us as human beings, we can attain liberation, we can attain Buddhahood. So therefore, those few gods, comparatively out of all the gods, those few who have an interest in the Dharma, they make prayers to be born as human beings because we can attain enlightenment in this body. And in the traditional presentation of the universe, which you'll know from the mandala offering, we are on the continent of Zambuling, and these beings here are considered the most fortunate. This is the very best basis for practice. So we are, from this perspective too, are of great fortune. Just first as a translator to say, because this is like one of the many areas where our language is limited. So the word that is being used here is gods. So it really refers to life forms higher than the human life form. So now to come to what Geshe said. So when we talk about gods, there are many different types. Those who are in the desire realm like we are, and those in the form and formless realms. Those gods cannot attain Buddhahood. But there are gods in Pure Lands, such as in Tushito, Dewachen. So those are gods too, and they can attain enlightenment. So the gods in Pure Lands can attain enlightenment, but the gods in the desire and form and formless realms, they cannot. So they are the ones who would look at us as human beings with envy, in the sense of they want to achieve enlightenment, but they are limited in not being able to do so in that life form.
어래 나니 문도 단단님보데 다 그신도 아니면 이게 주비게 단단님보데 섬다야들 하나 저기 유진의 자친구가 다른 하나도 톱제바래 자다 자친구 톱제바 된디다 저기 저 냐면 가래지 바래 지투이 니버 여바래 이게 섬다는 소소라는 게 하여튼 이게 약호시 중샤 특별히 중샤 생각에 소소라는 게 지가오 보면서 다시 내가 안지 나중에 냐면 야고 계셔도 마루가 있나냐 이 계셔 마루가 제 시소반에 계시 신예바요 시소반에 되네 나 경험에 세상에 다들 계셔 주위에서 배다가 제가 치마 파다니고 와서다 타바 탄제키고 고원토에 냐면 이거 지인에서 상식다지네 이들라라는 게 계셔 주고 해서 제가 이건 그렇게 해서 무슨 지인에서 상식다 내가 기본 기본권에 개월 두개야 안지게 그냥 지구만 있으면 탐제의 이주의 인생의 상다제 아주다 이주의 상념의 그래서는 심지어 담제 디아바다 코비 동안 하다를 조고도 세대 동안에 조고도 타고 세대 상다 얘네는 심지어 담제 디아바다 캠퍼쇼스를 생각하야 심지어 동안에 조고쇼스 이제 거면 사실은 팬바칭이 주비 선생의 동아다 세이 이기는 주비 선생의 얘네 가상계 얘네 기회 통해 어당에 대해 주야야 아마 튕긴 나라를 튕긴 참이 진짜 튕긴 참와시 연계지 수요고도 이 장에 산지고가 소쇼 선배 상다지 상다에 나주가 냠내지야데 얘네게 상다는 당이 산유고가 토리치도 누가 있으면 이제다 이지메 선배 상다 얘네는 이제 신이 투다 때문에 권조하다 계획 신이나 대게 한게 때 권조수가 최고 그게다 차서와서 이게 고아고아 이제 계셔 가지고 이제 스케줄을 얘네게 진짜 수준으로 하면 알아서 도시는 그래야 돼. 얘네 최고에서 도시 상가에 되는 거지. 얘네서 이상도 세단에 지다 이다도 지하에 하도 당데 상도지 공시를 채네. 지금 공시를 삼동을 하고 네가 공시 외바데 찾고 다 그냥 해야서 지 공주수에 공주되냐 니나시 찾아야 돼. 안지게 야 이거 찾다 도시는 좀 해서 이제 아지 이주에 몇년째서 도시는 지하고 해서 또를 게 내년이 아니라 이 제를 내기 주는 다만 제시 위배 신예주 상대 신예주 얘네들 영어 공부서 봐야 된다라 제시 위배 신예주 얘네 신예주 제시네 동반이 다음에 가서 동반이 제가 제시 동반이 또 동반들을 위배에 또 배시하기로 얘네 동반이 위배 신예다 그렇게 얘네 기초와서 공부할 때는 아니 명문가 대바제 다파다 감지고 토고리 이래서 제가 냠내제 또도 상다이 얘네 상당 오래서 제가 또 뒤에다
So to summarize then, what I encourage you to do in meditation is to first reflect on this precious human rebirth that you have. And the purpose of this reflection is to generate a joyous mind, a mind that really appreciates what we have. This uplifted mind that values just what we have achieved in this life. Because such a joyous mind that values what has been achieved, this will aid the determination not to let this opportunity go to waste. And then with this foundation, developing this foundation in the meditation, all the other subsequent steps that are to be cultivated will come about much more easily. Why? Because one is enjoying the meditation. And one will want to do this meditation again and again. One will want to keep it in mind throughout the day because the mind is delighting in this practice. So first, remind oneself of this precious human rebirth, why it's a precious human rebirth, and what we can achieve. And therefore, valuing what has been attained, set the determination not to let it go to waste. And then one can continue in varying ways. Reflecting, it's important though then to reflect on the sufferings of samsara and our potential now to gain freedom from that. And then cultivate the responsibility that is aware of the situation that others are in. So ourselves now sitting in meditation, we've recognized what we have achieved. We have the determination to put it to good use. We've recognized suffering and its causes, so we have a recognition what to abandon, and we have a recognition of what are the wholesome virtues to cultivate. So these we already know from prior teachings, prior meditations. So we call them to mind quickly in the meditation. And we immediately then are ready to compare ourselves to others who do not value what they've achieved. They do not recognize that they have a human rebirth with great potential. And thinking in this way, we come to recognize how they are wandering blind, confused in darkness of ignorance. Thinking like that, compassion arises for beings who keep creating causes that will lead them to suffer ever more. Compassion then we use as to further strengthen our determination not to let this life go to waste. We generate this compassion further, taking responsibility for all others. See it as our responsibility to help them, to guide them in the same way that we are being guided, to use this life well. But recognizing our own limitations, we generate the determination, I have to become a Buddha, and I have to become a Buddha as quickly as possible so that I can help others. I can communicate with them in a way they'll be receptive. I can guide them in a way that they will be receptive to. And this way we generate bodhicitta. And with such a motivation now generated, you can make offerings on your shrine, or if it's that one is going to do some walking, go do circumambulation, or if it's that time, then one sits down and meditates. One can meditate on ethics and the other various practices. So this motivation that I've mentioned, how to generate it, if you have familiarity with the meditation, you can call it to mind very quickly, because that familiarity is habituation, and it comes through meditation. Meditation changes the mind if one engages in it repeatedly over a sustained period. But meditation needs to be joined with continuing to receive inputs through teachings and so forth. So we all have seeds of virtuous minds, and in our various personalities, we express our habituations to these karmic imprints that we have. Some people are naturally kinder. Some people naturally have an understanding of what's virtuous, what's not virtuous. By strengthening our seeds, our karmic seeds, through habituation, we will become more loving people, kinder people, more compassionate. So this is all possible on the basis of this human life. And moreover, as we gain further knowledge, understanding about how to cultivate calm abiding, how to meditate on emptiness and so forth, these two additional practices which are indispensable to gain liberation, we can achieve. With these four roots that were mentioned earlier, when they are stable, the additional practices of bodhicitta, calm abiding, and the wisdom realizing emptiness, these will come about with relative ease. So I encourage you to spend time developing that foundation, getting it stable. Okay, thank you. And we'll end there. We won't take questions because I can't really see anyone. Thank you very much.